The contract was supposed to be signed in 40 minutes, and the only person in the building who had actually read it, really read it, page by page, clause by clause, was the temp they'd hired to file paperwork. Her name was Alice Rowe, and she was 29 years old, and she was standing in the hallway outside the boardroom, holding a manila folder like it was evidence at a trial, because it was. She'd found the error at 8:47 that morning, a single clause on page 31 of a 60-page commercial lease agreement. A clause that, if signed, would lock Meridian Development Corporation into a liability window that their legal team had somehow missed. Not a small liability. The kind that could cost the company north of $8 million if the tenant ever decided to exercise it. Alice had read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't wrong. Then she'd read it a 4th time. She wasn't wrong. The problem was that nobody at Meridian knew who she was. She'd been placed through a staffing agency 2 weeks ago. Her official title was Administrative Support, temporary, which meant she answered phones on the 14th floor. When the receptionist was at lunch, she filed documents that came down from legal, and she made sure the printer on the east side of the building never ran out of paper. Nobody had asked her name. Not once. She wore a laminate badge that said TEMP in orange letters above a photo that made her look vaguely alarmed, and most mornings she rode the elevator in complete silence next to people who looked through her like she was part of the wall. She knocked on the boardroom door anyway. The assistant who opened it, a woman in her 40s named Diane, whose expression made very clear she did not have time for interruptions, looked at Alice's badge first, then at Alice's face, then at the folder in her hands. "The contract has an error," Alice said. "Page 31. Clause 14 by. It needs to be reviewed before anyone signs anything." Diane blinked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Alice. I work on 14. I was filing the supplemental documents this morning, and I read through the agreement, and there's a liability clause that's going to cause a significant problem for Meridian." Diane's expression did not change. It was the expression of someone who had been working in corporate offices for 20 years and had learned to immediately categorize everything in front of her. Alice watched herself being categorized. It took about 3 seconds. "I'll let Mr. Hargrove know you stopped by," Diane said, and she closed the door. Alice stood in the hallway for a moment. She could hear voices inside. Laughter. The particular confident laughter of people who are very sure things are going to go well. She went back to her desk. She put the folder in front of her keyboard. She thought about the fact that she had a degree in contract law from the University of British Columbia that she'd never finished using because her mother had gotten sick in the middle of her articling year, and she'd needed to step back. And stepping back had become staying back, and staying back had become this. Temp work, filing, orange badges, invisible. She thought about the clause on page 31. She picked up the folder and went back downstairs. This time, she didn't knock on the boardroom door. She knocked on the door next to it. The smaller office with the frosted glass where she'd seen the man with a dark blue suit go in and out 3 times that morning. She'd noticed him because he walked like someone who made decisions for a living. Not in an arrogant way, in a focused way, like his mind was always slightly ahead of his body. His name, according to the directory she'd checked that morning, was Nathan Hargrove. Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Development Corporation. Age 38. Founded the company at 26 with a business partner who'd since left. Known in the industry for being precise, demanding, and not particularly warm. She knocked. "Come in." She went in. He was standing at the window with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled up, reading something on his phone. He looked up when she entered. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, the controlled expression of someone who'd been in enough high-stakes rooms to stop showing what he was thinking. He looked at her badge. Temp. Orange letters. "You're not Diane," he said. "No. I'm Alice Rowe. I work on 14. I need you to look at something before your 11 o'clock. I have 6 minutes. I need 3. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but attention. He put his phone down. 3 minutes, he said. She put the folder on his desk and opened it to page 31, where she'd flagged Clause 14 Bob with a sticky note and underlined the relevant section in pencil. This clause allows the tenant to invoke a force majeure exception that's defined differently in Schedule C than it is in the main body of the contract, she said. In the main body, force majeure is limited to acts of God and government intervention. In Schedule C, which is the operative schedule for rent abatement purposes, The definition includes any material change in economic conditions affecting the tenant's core business sector. That's an enormous opening. If the tenant's business has a bad quarter and they want to reduce their rent obligations, this gives them a legal basis to do it, and Meridian would have a very difficult time challenging it in court. Nathan Hargrove was reading while she spoke. Not glancing, reading. She could see his eyes moving line by line. "Where did you find this?" he said. "I was filing the supplemental documents this morning. I read the agreement while I was organizing it." "You read a 60-page commercial lease agreement while filing." "I read everything I file," Alice said. "I have a habit." He looked up at her then. Not at her badge, at her face. "Do you have a legal background?" "I studied law. I didn't finish." He looked back at the page. A long moment passed. Outside, she could hear the elevator bell and the distant sound of voices, the people arriving for the 11 o'clock, probably. The tenants' team. The people who were about to sign a contract that Meridian's entire legal department had approved. "Diane stopped by to tell me a temp was worried about the contract," Nathan said slowly. "I know. She didn't think it warranted interrupting the prep session." "I know that, too." He closed the folder. His jaw was tight. Not at her, she could tell the difference. At something else. At the situation. At himself, maybe, for having trusted the process completely. "Excuse me," he said. He picked up the folder, walked past her, and opened the door. She heard him in the hallway, his voice low and controlled, speaking to someone. Then a different voice, higher, defensive. Then a silence that was very loud. Alice sat down in the chair across from his desk because her legs were tired, and she didn't see any reason to stand for the sake of appearances when there was a perfectly good chair right there. She waited. He came back 11 minutes later. His expression was different now. Not closed, but deliberate. The way a face looks when someone has just made a decision and is living in the first moments of it. "The 11 o'clock has been moved to 2, he said. "Legal is reviewing the contract." "Okay," Alice said. "They found 2 additional issues while they were at it." He paused. Minor ones. But still. She didn't say anything. "The clause you found," Nathan said, "would have cost us potentially $8 million over the life of that lease, depending on how aggressively the tenant chose to use it." "I estimated between 6 and 10, Alice said, "depending on the market." He looked at her the way she'd seen people look at something they couldn't quite place. Like a word they knew but couldn't find. "Why are you working as a temp?" he said. It wasn't a cruel question, it was a direct one. She'd learned to tell the difference over the years. "My mother was sick," Alice said. "I stepped back from articling, and then one thing became another thing, and here I am." "Is she?" "She passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry." "Thank you." He sat down across from her, which surprised her. Not at his desk. In the other chair, the one beside hers. Like they were 2 people having a conversation rather than a CEO and a filing temp. "What firm were you articling with?" he said. "Caldwell Baxter. Downtown Vancouver. I know them." He was quiet for a moment. "Would you be interested in a different role here?" "Something in contract review." Alice looked at him. "You don't know anything about me. I know you read 60 pages of a commercial lease agreement for no reason, found an error that 3 lawyers missed, and then came back after someone closed a door in your face," Nathan said. "That's actually quite a lot." She thought about saying something cautious. Something measured. Something that acknowledged the professional complexity of accepting a position from someone she'd met 17 minutes ago. Instead, she said, "What does the role pay?" And something happened to his face that she didn't expect. It wasn't a smile, exactly. It was more like the beginning of one, like a door that had been closed for a long time opening just a crack. "More than the agency is paying you," he said. "That's not a number." "I know." He stood up. "Come back at 2. You can sit in on the revised contract review. We'll talk specifics after." She stood. She picked up the manila folder because she'd forgotten it was hers to take. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Nathan, the error in Schedule C. Someone on your legal team drafted that language. Or approved it. You might want to understand how that happened before you celebrate fixing it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm aware." "Okay," she said. She walked out. In the elevator on the way back to 14, she pressed the button and stood very still and let herself feel, just for a moment, the particular dizziness of something changing. Not dramatically, not with fanfare. The way things actually change, one quiet decision at a time, in a room where nobody was watching. She was back at her desk before anyone noticed she'd been gone. The contract review at 2 o'clock was attended by Nathan, 2 senior lawyers from Meridian's legal team, a man named Douglas and a woman named Patricia. And at the last minute, Alice, who arrived to find that someone had placed a nameplate in front of an empty chair that read Alice Rowe in printed capitals. Not Temp. Douglas noticed her first. He was a heavy-set man in his early 50s with the particular confidence of someone who had never, in his professional life, been wrong about anything, or at least had never acknowledged it. He looked at the nameplate, then at Alice, then at Nathan. "I wasn't aware we were including administrative staff," Douglas said. "Alice found the clause," Nathan said. He didn't look up from the revised document in front of him. "She's here because she's useful." Douglas said nothing, but something crossed his face, the briefest contraction, like a muscle tightening, and Alice filed it away because she'd learned, over years of being underestimated, that you always wanted to know exactly who in the room resented your presence. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Alice spoke 4 times, once to clarify the Schedule C language, once to point out that the revision Douglas proposed still left a secondary interpretive gap, once to suggest alternative wording that closed both the original issue and the secondary one, and once to answer Nathan's question about whether the revised language would hold up in BC Supreme Court. "Likely yes," she said, "but you'd want a Queen's Counsel opinion if you're going to rely on it in a high-value dispute." Patricia, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, made a note. She was younger than Douglas, mid-40s, with a precise way of moving that suggested she was used to being the most prepared person in the room. She caught Alice's eye once and gave a small nod, not warm, but professional. Alice took it as a professional thing and moved on. By 4 o'clock the contract was revised, the tenants' team had reviewed the changes, and the 11 o'clock that had become a 2 o'clock had finally happened, successfully, at 4:15. Nathan came to find her at her desk at 5:30. She was the only person left on 14. The afternoon light came through the west windows in long horizontal bars, and the office had that particular Friday stillness where you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "The signing went through," he said. "Good." He sat down in the chair beside her desk, the visitor chair, the one that was usually empty, with the ease of someone who didn't think about whether he was allowed to sit somewhere. "Douglas is unhappy," he said. "I noticed. He drafted the original Schedule C language. I figured. He's been with the company for 9 years. Alice looked at him. "Are you warning me about something?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'm telling you the situation clearly, because you seem like someone who prefers that." She did prefer that. It was one of the things that had made the past 2 years difficult, the way people softened things at her, patted them, delivered hard truths in so much wrapping that by the time she unwrapped them the thing inside was already cold. "Douglas will manage his feelings," Nathan said. "That's his job, not yours. Yours, as of Monday, is contract review. Junior level to start, which is standard, but the compensation is significantly above standard." He named a number. Alice kept her expression neutral. The number was more than she'd made in the previous 14 months combined. "There's a 6-month probationary period," Nathan said, "after which the position becomes permanent, with benefits, and you'd have the option to complete your articling requirements through the firm we retain. Full support, paid study time." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Because you're good at this. You've known me for 9 hours. 8.5, he said. "But yes, most people would call that impulsive. Most people didn't watch you sit in a contract review and correct a senior lawyer's proposed language in real time," Nathan said. "I'd call it responsive to evidence." She looked down at her keyboard. The temp badge was still around her neck. She'd forgotten to take it off. She took it off now and set it on the desk. "Monday," she said. 8 o'clock, he said, "not 8:30. "I start early, so do I," Alice said. He stood. He picked up his jacket from where he'd apparently left it on the corner of her desk at some point during the afternoon. She hadn't noticed. And then he paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were right to come back after Diane closed the door." "I know," Alice said. He laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of him, like he hadn't been expecting to do it. She noted that it changed his face considerably, knocked something loose in the careful arrangement of it, and revealed something younger underneath. Then he was gone, and she was alone on 14 with the hum of the ventilation and the last of the afternoon light. She sat there for a while. Then she called her younger sister, Becca, who picked up on the second ring, as she always did, because Becca was the kind of person who always had her phone within arm's reach and always answered, no matter what. A quality Alice had spent years being simultaneously grateful for and slightly envious of. "You're never going to believe what happened today," Alice said. You got fired from the temp job, Becca said immediately. No. Someone spilled coffee on you. Also no. Alice, just tell me. I'm making dinner and the pasta is almost done. I found a legal error in an $8 million contract, Alice said. And I got offered a job. A long pause. Are you serious? Yes, a real job. Not temp, permanent, with benefits, and paid articling support. The sound on the other end was loud and immediate, and involved what might have been a wooden spoon hitting a pot. Alice held the phone away from her ear and smiled. Monday came with the kind of early October chill that Vancouver saves for days when you actually need to be somewhere on time. Alice arrived at 7:45. The 14th floor was empty. She rode the elevator to the executive floor for the first time without a reason to apologize for it. And when the doors opened, Nathan was already at his desk with his jacket on and a coffee in his hand and a document open in front of him. He looked up. 7:45, he said. You said you start early, Alice said. He handed her a coffee from the second cup she now noticed on the corner of his desk. She took it without comment because it would have been strange to comment on it, and because it was exactly how she took it. Black, no sugar, and she didn't ask how he knew. She found out later it was Diane who'd told him. Diane, who had initially closed a door in her face, and who had spent the intervening weekend apparently reconsidering, because when she met Alice in the elevator on Tuesday morning she said, very quietly, "You were right to push," and then looked straight ahead at the elevator doors, as though she hadn't said anything. Alice said, "Thank you," in the same tone. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and somehow after that it was fine. The weeks that followed were not simple. Douglas made things difficult in the way that people make things difficult when they can't do openly. Slightly too much silence in meetings, slightly too few resources forwarded. Documents that arrived on her desk just past the point where she had enough time to review them properly. Alice documented everything. She said nothing to Nathan about it directly because she didn't need to. She was good enough at the work that the documentation spoke for itself. And she had learned, through years of navigating rooms where she wasn't supposed to be, that the most effective response to someone trying to undermine you quietly is to be so visibly competent that there's nothing left to undermine. By week 6, Douglas had stopped the document delays. By week 8, he'd stopped the meeting silences. By week 10, he asked her, in a corridor, to look over a clause he'd drafted. She looked it over. She found a minor issue. She told him plainly and without performance. He said thanks in a voice that cost him something to say, and she took that as a reasonable outcome and moved on. Nathan, in the meantime, was proving to be exactly as advertised, precise, demanding, and not particularly warm in any conventional sense. He didn't make small talk. He didn't remember to say good morning unless he was already saying something else. He worked 12-hour days as a matter of course, and he expected the people around him to bring their full attention to everything, and he gave his full attention to everything in return, which was, Alice found, a kind of respect that she valued more than warmth. He also had a daughter. She found out about Mila in week 3, when a small person appeared in the doorway of Nathan's office on a Thursday afternoon, 7 years old, dark eyes like her father's, a school bag that was almost as big as she was. Alice had been in Nathan's office going over a lease addendum when Mila arrived, and Nathan's whole bearing changed in a way that was remarkable to witness, not softer, exactly, but differently focused. The way a compass needle moves when it finds north. "You're early," he said, "Mrs. Kowalski let us out at 3 because of the heater," Mila said. She looked at Alice with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking at someone. "Who are you?" "Alice. I work with your dad. Do you know about contracts?" "Yes. Dad talks about contracts a lot. That tracks," Alice said. Mila considered her for a moment with the focused seriousness of someone conducting an evaluation. Then she went to the small couch in the corner of Nathan's office, took out a notebook and a pencil case with a unicorn on it, and began doing what appeared to be homework. Nathan watched this, and then looked back at Alice, with the expression of someone resuming a meeting that had briefly been interrupted by the most important thing in his life. They continued the meeting, but Alice noticed, after that, the way he arranged his days around Mila's schedule without ever saying so. The calls he took while standing near the window so he could watch the building entrance. The way he left at exactly 5:15 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, no exceptions, regardless of what was on his desk. She noticed and she said nothing, and she arranged her own Thursday afternoons so that the things Nathan needed from her were done before 5, because it was simply the correct thing to do. Mila started appearing on Thursday afternoons with more frequency. She would do homework in the corner, or draw things in her notebook, or occasionally come to stand in the doorway of the smaller office Alice had been given, a real office, with a window, which she still wasn't entirely used to, and ask questions. What's an indemnity clause? It's a clause that says if something goes wrong, one party agrees to cover the other party's losses. Like insurance? Similar. Insurance is a product you buy. Indemnity is a promise you make. Mila thought about this. Can you put an indemnity clause in a friendship? Technically you could, Alice said. It wouldn't be legally binding, but it would mean something. Yes, Alice said. It would mean something. Mila nodded, like this was the answer she'd been looking for, and went back to her notebook. Nathan appeared in the doorway shortly after. Sorry if she's bothering you, he said. She's not, Alice said. He looked at his daughter, then at Alice with an expression she couldn't read. Layered and quiet, like something happening underneath still water. She lost her mother 4 years ago, he said. Not explaining, exactly, just offering. I know, Alice said. She hadn't known. She'd guessed, from the particular shape of Mila's self-sufficiency, from the way she occupied her father's spaces without asking permission, from the absence of any mention of anyone else. I'm sorry. She's doing well, Nathan said. Better than I probably give her credit for. Kids usually are, Alice said, and parents usually don't give them enough credit for it. He looked at her then, directly, for a moment that lasted slightly longer than professional. Your mother, he said. Yes, Alice said. It took me a long time to understand she was doing okay. I was too busy worrying to see it. She hadn't meant to say that much. It came out simply, without her planning it, which was how the most true things tended to come out. Nathan was quiet. Then, Mila likes you. I like her. She doesn't usually talk to people at the office. She has good taste then, Alice said. Most of the conversations at this office are about liability. He laughed again, that same surprise sound, knocked loose rather than produced. It was becoming her favorite thing about him, she realized, because it was the only part of him that was genuinely unguarded. She thought about this on her way home that evening, on the SkyTrain with her bag on her lap, watching the city slide past the windows in the early dark. She thought about the laugh, and what it indicated, and what she was going to do about what it indicated, and she arrived at the conclusion that she was going to do nothing about it, because he was her employer, and she was 8 weeks into a probationary period, and she was not the kind of person who confused gratitude with something else. She was also, she admitted to herself, a little bit afraid, not of him, of the thing that had started to feel possible, the shape of a life that looked different from the one she'd been living, the outline of something she'd stopped letting herself imagine. She'd stopped imagining it when her mother got sick. It was easier then, not to, and easier had calcified into habit, and habit had calcified into a kind of armor, and she wore the armor so naturally now that she sometimes forgot it was there. Mila reminded her it was there. Nathan's laugh reminded her it was there. She looked out the window at the city lights and decided not to think about it, and thought about it anyway. The invitation arrived 6 weeks later, which was 12 weeks into Alice's employment. 2 days after she'd successfully completed the revised commercial lease documentation that had been the original source of everything, and 1 day after Nathan's assistant had CC'd her on an email that described her, in passing, as a key member of the contracts team. The invitation was to a charity dinner, a fundraiser for a children's hospital foundation, which Meridian sponsored annually. It came through the standard company email, addressed to all senior staff. Alice was not senior staff. She was still technically in her probationary period. She forwarded it to Diane with a note asking if there'd been an error in the distribution list. Diane wrote back, 15 minutes later, "No error, Mr. Hargrove added you." Alice sat with that for a while. She went, in the end, because not going would have been a decision with its own implications, and she'd rather make the decision actively than by default. She borrowed a dress from Becca, who was both thrilled and insufferable about it, and arrived at the hotel ballroom on a Friday evening in November, feeling precisely the way she always felt in rooms full of people who had never filed anything in their lives. Observant, slightly removed, and privately amused. Nathan found her within 10 minutes. He was in a dark suit and he looked like himself, which was to say contained and purposeful, and he brought her a glass of water because, he said, the wine at these events was always worse than the reputation suggested. "You came," he said. "You added me to the list. I was reasonably confident you'd talk yourself out of it." She looked at him. "So you added me to make it harder to say no?" I added you because you belong on the list, he said, simply and without decoration. She looked away. At the room. At the people. At a waiter balancing a tray. Mila's with your parents tonight? She said. My mother. She's making her favorite, pasta with way too much cheese. Does Mila know it's way too much? She considers it exactly enough, Nathan said. We disagree on this regularly, Alice smiled. I'm on Mila's side. Everyone always is, he said. There was something in his voice. Tender, a little wry. The way people sound when they're talking about someone they love, so much it's become part of their vocabulary. She told me to say hi to you tonight. She knew I was coming. She asked if you were coming. When I said yes, she told me to say hi. Alice was quiet for a moment. She's a remarkable kid, she said. She is, Nathan said. She said something to me last week that I've been thinking about since. He paused. She said Alice seems like someone who stays. Alice didn't say anything. I think she meant it as a compliment, Nathan said. In our context, it's a high bar. It's a high bar in most contexts, Alice said. He turned slightly to face her, and the room behind him blurred a little at the edges the way rooms do when something is happening in the foreground. The probationary period ends in 3 weeks, he said. I'm aware, after which we'll make the position permanent. And the articling arrangement, Nathan. And I'd like to have dinner with you, he said. Not a work dinner, not an event, just dinner. If that's something you'd consider. She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching, without softening it into something easier. He was offering it plainly, the way he offered everything, directly, without decoration, because he'd apparently decided that was how he was going to do this. Not until the probationary period is over, she said. He nodded once. 3 weeks, 3 weeks, she said. He handed her the water glass and turned back to the room, and she could see the almost smile at the corner of his mouth. And she thought about the first morning she'd walked into his office with a manila folder and 3 minutes and an error nobody else had found. She thought about how many doors she'd had closed in her face over the years and how she'd gone back anyway. Not because she was fearless, because she was tired of letting closed doors mean something. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, Alice completed her probationary period review, which Patricia conducted with the efficiency and precision of someone who genuinely enjoyed paperwork. Patricia signed the form. Alice signed the form. The form went to HR. At 5:15, she passed Nathan in the corridor. He was putting his jacket on. Mila's Thursday, even though it was Tuesday, because Tuesdays and Thursdays had apparently blurred together sometime in the past month. He looked at her. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she said. And she kept walking, because she had her coat to get and a call to make to Becca, who was going to be both thrilled and insufferable, and because some moments are best left exactly as they are, clean and true, and already becoming the beginning of something you'll spend years being glad you didn't talk yourself out of.